Hello, hello. Welcome to the 2017 Future City Theme webinar. We're very excited to have you join us today. Before we get started, could I get a few people to just click on the raise hand button on your webinar control panel, just so I can be sure that you can hear me? The sound's working. Great. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Christine. Excellent. Well, my name is Jake Williams. I'm the program coordinator for the Future City competition. Also on the line is Future City's program manager, Maggie Dressel.
Hey guys.
Thank you for joining us for the annual topic webinar. This year's Future City topic, as you probably know, is the age-friendly city. And it's all about addressing age-related challenges that exist in our urban environments. This webinar is an opportunity to hear from three fantastic subject matter experts who know a lot about this year's theme. They'll give you some background information and they'll also let you in on some of the work that they do. By the end of the webinar, you'll have a really great jumping off point to brainstorm your own age-friendly ideas and solutions. Before we get into that, I wanted to mention Discover-E, which is the organization that runs and organizes the Future City competition. In addition to Future City, they have a ton of other programs and free resources, especially for educators and for STEM mentors. If you're looking for classroom activities or career information, things like engineering videos, and a lot of other content for your school or out-of-school program, be sure to check out the website. That's up on the screen now, discover-e.org. The Future City competition wouldn't be possible without the help of our great sponsors and partners, so I wanted to thank them for their great support. And a special shout out to AARP. You've probably heard of them. They do great work to support literally millions of people. We'll hear a bit about some of the work that they do today, and I'm sure you'll come across them again later while you're researching and working on your cities. A couple quick housekeeping technical things. The program we're using is GoToWebinar. If the sound quality isn't working or you'd like it to be a little bit better, we have a teleconference line that you can use. Just dial in this number here and the access code that you see on the screen, and you'll be able to hear the program through the phone. The recorded webinar will be posted tomorrow on futurecity.org in our resources section in the webinar category. And be sure to take the survey that comes up after the webinar. It'll pop up when the webinar is finished, and your feedback really helps us with continuing to make these as productive to you and as interesting as possible. You might have noticed that as a participant, you are muted. With all the participants that we have on the line right now, if everyone was trying to talk, you wouldn't be able to hear anything. So if you have a question, just type it into the control panel whenever you'd like. And after all three presenters have spoken, they'll be answering as many questions as we can get to. We have a great panel of experts joining us today. Martin Flans will be hosting the program, and we're joined also by Shannon Guzman from AARP's Public Policy Institute, Bill Armbruster from AARP's Livable Communities Department, and Glenn Miller from the Canadian Urban Institute. So now let's get started. I'd like to introduce our host and master of ceremonies for the webinar, Martin Flans. Martin is a professional engineer at Bentley Systems, one of Future City's great sponsors. During his time at Bentley, he served as a software trainer, an application engineer, marketing manager, and a user experience research manager. He's now the user adoption manager of hydraulics and hydrology modeling software. Previously, he worked as an environmental engineer and managed the design and construction of water and wastewater projects. He's also a longtime friend and supporter of Future City, both at the regional and finals level. We're so glad to have Martin back again to host the annual topic webinar. So now I'd like to turn it over to Martin.
Okay, thank you, Jake. Thank you very much, and welcome to everybody attending. Go ahead, next slide, please. Just before we kind of get into the topic that you're eagerly waiting to hear about, I wanted to remind you a few things as you're going through this Future City competition. It's a fun, exciting competition that you're in. And I wanted just to get you to stop and think for a moment how you're going to go from the idea to a city, to a real city, and how that really happens in the real world. It's the same process. Next slide, please. If it's a real city or it's your future city, you would first start out with the problem. Maybe there's a problem you're trying to solve, maybe there's an issue or challenge or something. So you would follow this process, this engineering process, and this is what everyone does in the real world in engineering, and it's the exact same thing you're going to do in the competition. Identify the problem and look at your resources. In the competition, you have an unlimited amount of different resources and creativity at your disposal. So it's a fun, exciting way to explore that creativity. Then you look at those options and you figure out how you're going to make it work. How is it going to fit together? And then start questioning, does it really, really work? Is it going to be practical? Is it going to be able to all fit together, and explain it? Then you need to communicate it and make it happen. So the Future City design process, you'll find that on your handbook on page 12. So that's going to be there for you as a reference, and we encourage you to use this engineering design process throughout the competition on the various stages that you're going to work on. Okay, so I just want to share that one thought for you, and now let's go ahead and get on to the great list of speakers that we have today. Next slide. First up, we have Shannon Guzman. Shannon is a Policy Research Senior Analyst with AARP's Public Policy Institute, where she works primarily on livable communities issues. She conducts research and analysis to inform community members and assist local decision makers in their efforts to support residents who want to age in place, and we're going to find out what that means by in place. She's co-authored publications on community, livability, housing, and transportation. She's analyzed national crash statistics and aided in the development of community assessments. So based on all of that research and firsthand knowledge, she has some great ideas on how to incorporate this year's design challenge topic into your city. So make sure to listen and pay close attention to not only Shannon, but the other speakers, and take notes along the way. And that said, over to you, Shannon.
Thanks so much, Martin, and also Jake and Maggie for inviting me here. Again, my name is Shannon Guzman. I'm a Senior Policy Analyst with the Public Policy Institute at AARP. And at AARP's Public Policy Institute, we conduct research and make policy recommendations to improve the lives of older adults and their family. So I'm really glad to be here to discuss livable communities and help inform your age-friendly future city projects. I work with, on the Livable Communities team, I work with a team of urban planners, and we work on issues like housing and transportation and land use to help ensure that communities are safe and accessible and vibrant for people of all ages. Next slide. So right now, our demographics in the United States are changing. We are aging. We're an aging population. By 2030, 20%, it's projected that 20% of the population will be the age of 65 or older. And that's significant because older adults are telling us through surveys, through our survey work, that they want to age in their homes and communities. And what that means is that they want to stay where they are. They want to age in place because they've made connections where they live. Social connections, connections with work, so maybe they volunteer, it's places they raise their families. So the issue is many communities across the country weren't built to accommodate the needs of older adults. So we have a great opportunity now to shape the communities of tomorrow by understanding where those gaps between what we have and what we need are. Next slide. So when we talk about a livable community, we want to have places where we can remain active and engaged and independent as we age. And that means we need certain community features. These pictures here, some show my neighborhood here in Washington, D.C., but show the type of features that we should have in a livable community. So to the top left, we have accessible housing. That means housing that's easy for someone to navigate through and to get into. We have certain destinations like a library. That's a place where we get information about community events and learn new things and meet our neighbors. We have access to grocery stores and other services, places to buy healthy foods, places to do your banking, things like that. We have access to parks and open spaces for social gatherings, places to connect with friends and neighbors, places to exercise and be active. We also have a variety of transportation options. We need to have a safe travel environment and certain modes of transportation that help us get to where we need to go by public transportation, walking or biking or car or other means. Next slide. Another feature of livable communities is that they're inclusive of everyone. They're designed for all community members. So that means individuals, older adults, families, and people with disabilities. We also, again, want to create a safe travel environment for different users, so pedestrians, bicycles, public transportation. And a livable community can be in any geography, from the most urban place to suburban to a rural place. These are all certain features that you can have to make your community more livable. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the Redefining Home, Home Today, Home Tomorrow design competition, and the people that you see here in this photo, cutting the ribbon. Here you have Walter Moody and his mother, who were the recipients of this home. I was the co-lead on this project, Redefining Home, Home Today, Home Tomorrow, and this work showed an example of how we at AARP work to take policy off the page in order to spark tangible community change. So we issued a call to architects and designers to submit designs on home renovation of an existing home to make it more accessible. Walter had some challenges. He had been homeless, he'd been unemployed, but he turned his life around. He got a job and had an apartment, but his mother couldn't visit him in his home because she couldn't climb the stairs up to his apartment. Next slide. So Walter was the recipient of this quote-unquote ageless home. It's a home designed for any life stage. So we took an existing home that you see there on the left, and through design and construction and renovation, transformed it into what you see there on the right. So this ageless home incorporates universal design and visitable features. Universal design includes features that accommodate any type of user. And a visitable home means that it's suitable for anyone to visit regardless of their ability. So features you see that this home would have would be a zero-step entry or wide doorways within the home, something like a curbless shower to accommodate a walker. Next slide. So with these pictures, on the reveal day, Walter's mom was able to get into the home with no problem. So she can visit him, and she'll even be able to live with him. And what's great for Walter is that this home will age with him. So as his needs may change, the home has certain features that can support him as he ages. Next slide. And I want to introduce you to the three architects who designed the home. This is a diverse group of young professionals, all under the age of 30. Their designs were incorporated into this home. Carmen, that you see in the middle, Carmen Velez, she actually lived with her grandmother, and those experiences that she had with her grandmother helped to inform the design of this home. But I show this as an example of how young people have a critical role and voice in addressing the needs of older adults, and how they can make communities more livable. Next slide. And just quickly, this is a picture of the various partners, AARP, AARP Foundation, Home Matters, and several other partners that work together to make this possible. So when you think about solutions, think about various public and private partners and also nonprofit partners that can work together along with the community to make community change. Next slide. This is a design toolkit that came from that design competition. You can go and visit the website to see what aspects of this home make it accessible for all users. Next slide. And this is another example of our work. It's called the Livability Index, Great Neighborhoods for All Ages. We want to help communities become more livable. So this tool measures how well communities are meeting the needs of people as they age. And we measure communities based on several categories: housing, transportation, opportunity, and neighborhood. And you can go to the website there and type in any location in the United States and get a score for how well your community is doing. Next slide. Just wanted to highlight a few strategies that you can think about when you're trying to create a livable communities to help address the needs of older adults. You want to look at, you want to take a holistic view of policy issues and solutions. You want to understand how transportation interacts with housing, how it interacts with the community, the neighborhood, the amenities, the services, and the features. You want to look at environment. If you look at that Livability Index tool, you can see how those things interplay. There's also no one singular solution you should have to address certain issues. You want to have a toolbox of solutions. Next slide. And these are AARP's Livable Communities principles that you can learn more about in our policy book. But you want to ensure equitable access. You want to prioritize accessibility and the ability to age in place. You want to promote health, safety, and environmental sustainability. Next slide. These next two slides show examples of certain solutions that you may want to think about when you come up with your own innovative ideas to make communities more livable. For example, this healthcare provider worked with a community organization on a collaboration to create affordable housing. This place near Boston on the right-hand side, they co-located a high school with a senior center so they can have that intergenerational connections and share great information together, help each other, but it also uses less resources as these two facilities are together. Next slide. You want to think about places where community members can have options to healthy foods. In a more urban place, you may experience food deserts where there aren't large supermarkets. So in this particular example, local organizations worked with corner stores to have more healthy food options. And also you want to think about connections between land uses and multiple modes of transportation. Here's a picture of a metro station in Washington, D.C. area, but it has access to a bus and also has like the bike system that people can use, or a bike rental system that people can use here in this city. So here you're connecting multiple modes of transportation. Next slide. So that's it for my presentation. I've been really excited about sharing the type of work that we do here at AARP to help communities become more livable. If you need more information, here are a list of links to some of our resources. Also, a way you can follow the Public Policy Institute and me as we tweet about livable communities issues. And I've also provided Jake and Maggie with some resources that could help you along your path to creating your communities, your future cities. So thank you very much, everyone.
All right, great job, Shannon, and that was pretty neat. Good presentation. I did actually type in my livability index for my area, or search my area to find that out. So a lot of interesting things to decipher there. So good talk. And those links that she shared, I believe that Future City will have those available. That way you don't have to worry about copying all the links down. So hopefully that'll be available for you. All right, so on to our next speaker. We have Bill Armbruster. Bill is the Senior Advisor in the AARP's Livable Communities Department and has been with AARP for over 17 years. He manages the AARP network of age-friendly communities and is responsible for the development, implementation, and assessment of the network. He also consults with communities and states around the country to assist them with becoming more age-friendly. Bill also manages numerous national partnerships and presents at state and national conferences on different aspects of the age-friendly livable community. Bill has an enlightening perspective on what an age-friendly community really means and how to go about achieving it. So Bill, over to you.
Thanks, Martin, and welcome everybody to the webinar. I want to start out with this slide. I absolutely love this slide. This is Forging Neighborhoods for All Generations. A lot of times when people think about AARP, we tend to focus on older adults. We look at people who are 50 plus, but livability is about all generations. And part of the reason that we became involved with this work was a lot of the focus on planning for communities was thinking about youth and families with children, and then didn't really think about what it took for an older adult or someone as they were getting older to stay in the community. So we decided we wanted to change the dialogue from having a community be a great place to grow up to have it be a great place to grow up and grow old. And as you can see by the slide, for 56 years we've been working on issues like with the Freedom House here, talking about accessibility. So there's still a lot of work to be done. And I think that's the exciting part about this competition is you get to design things, and these will be seen by other people, and hopefully you can actually impact and influence how things are done in the future. And I also just want to talk, we hear about aging in place. What we want to do is take place and really think about aging in community. So if I think about if I'm aging in place, I'm sitting in a chair and people are bringing services to me. What we want to do is as you design your communities to really think about how you can engage people out in the community. Next slide. So for us, the Age-Friendly is a process. It's AARP is the affiliate of the World Health Organization's global network of cities and communities. And so we manage that network for the United States. And it's a 5-year process that we go through. But I think you don't have 5 years, but I think there's things that you could look at that we take into account. At the beginning of any community coming into the network, we really have them take time to survey the community, people of all ages, all generations. We have them find out what kind of services are there in place, what seems to be missing, and then listen to people. Find out, ask somebody who's 70 years old, what would you like to see in your community? What would allow you to stay here? But then ask somebody who's 50, 30, multiple generations in terms of what they think. So you're not just planning for a current population that might be 65 plus, but you're planning for future generations as well. And then when we talk about, so then they create a plan from there and then take a couple years to implement that plan to evaluate and see how it's impacted the community. And then on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see these are the domains that we look at, making sure that they're integrated. You notice these aren't all separate, but they're connected. As Shannon talked about, housing, transportation, outdoor spaces, but we look at community services, health services, social participation, respect, social inclusion, and communication. Next slide. So I want to give you an idea of what the network looks like now. So as of a week ago, the 188 communities across the nation. You can see this map, and it's growing weekly. There are over almost 66 million people who live in these communities. That means 1 in every 4 Americans of all ages live in a community that's enrolled in this network. And that runs everything from large, huge communities like New York City and LA, Miami, Portland, Seattle, to communities of 400 or 500 from a rural area in Maine. So this is a process that works in any type of situation. Next slide, please. So the first thing I want to talk about, outdoor spaces and buildings. So as you're going through your planning for the competition, think about how people are going to interact with their environment. Are there parks that you're planning in your community? Are the parks safe? Are they accessible? Do you maintain them? Are they nearby? Sometimes people will say, oh, we want this large park, but there may not be walkable for people outside of a certain distance. So start to think about, do you want one big park? Do you want small parks? What do those parks look like? Do they have benches? Do they have shade? You know, is it a place that people can gather? And then also thinking about that as you design your streets as well is, you know, is it engaging? Is it walkable? And, can people walk to go to stores and restaurants and barbershops and different things like that? And the other aspect is transportation. Typically when we talk about transportation, we talk about cars. And I think we want to really think about moving people. How do we move people, and what kind of options do they have, whether they can drive or not? We've spent many decades planning our communities around cars and making them very car dependent. So through this challenge, you have an opportunity to think, all right, I'm in middle school. How would I get around if I needed to get back and forth to school or go to the grocery store? Some of you may live in a city, you have access to a bus, or other types of transportation or family. But so think about how you would get around, but then also think about what if someone had driven their entire lives and now they were looking at giving up the keys? How would someone who's not used public transportation, or maybe Uber or Lyft or other types of rideshare situation, how would they get around? So think broadly, and again, this is a great opportunity to ask people some questions. How would you get around if you didn't have transportation? Next slide, please. Housing. I think Shannon did a great job of going through this. You know, we find after many, many studies that people want to stay in home or stay in their community, and what kind of options are there for them. So when you're thinking about housing, are they accessible, like Shannon showed with the Forever Home? No step entry, wider doors, wider hallways, accessible bathrooms. But are they affordable? Can everybody in your community afford those? Are there a variety of options for people as they age who may want to transition from a home to an apartment or a townhouse or whatever it may be? So think about having different types of housing within your community. And then social participation. I think this, to me, is an important part as you build your community, to think about connectivity. Can people connect to your community? How does the housing connect? Does the transportation connect near their housing? Can people get to doctors? Can people go to fun outdoor activities? Can they go to concerts? These types of things, making sure that we're creating opportunities for people to get out of the house and out in the community and not necessarily become isolated. The next slide, please. Respect and social inclusion. Are you bringing people together? And I think inclusion is the key word here. If you're not planning for including your community, whether it be intergenerational, whether it be diversity, whether it be a variety of other things. If you're not thinking about inclusion, you're probably creating exclusion, which means you're excluding people from that part of the community. So think about, are you connecting different folks to be able to engage in the community? Civic participation and work. Civic participation, volunteerism, is a huge part of supporting our community. Do you have volunteer opportunities within your community for people to give back? Are there folks who can come read at the elementary school? Are there people who are helping out with food insecurity by volunteering at food banks and soup kitchens? And think about that. And employment. Can people stay working in your community if they want to or need to? And I think that's a huge thing. We're seeing probably 23% of people between 60 and 70 who are still in the workforce, either because they have to or they want to. Next slide, please. Communication and information. This is a key area because you want to be able to let people know what you're doing. You want to provide people an opportunity to give your feedback. So how are you communicating what's going on in your community? How are you connected with folks? With remembering not everybody is comfortable or has access to technology. So they may not be on Twitter, they may not be on Snapchat, they may not be on Facebook. So thinking about how you're getting out to people what's going on in their community, how they can access it. And again, ask people how they want to be communicated with. How would you like to get your information on this? How would you like to let us know? Plus, when you're building your community, you want to find out, are you, the things you heard about and you're implementing and building into your community, are they actually what people want? So is the feedback you're getting, yeah, this works great. You put transportation in a great place. You thought about housing. You thought about accessibility. So make sure you're able to get feedback as well. And then community and health services. Those are all those things that people need to live in the community. Can they get to the doctor? Is there a hospital? Are there beauty parlors and barbers? Are there grocery stores, other services, restaurants, gas stations, eye doctors, libraries? Think about those things that people need in their community, but then also think about how close they are in their community. Can people get to them? Can they walk to them, or is there a bus that will take them there? How do you move forward with thinking about all the pieces that you want to get into your community? Next slide, please. Thank you.
All right, that was a great presentation there, and a wonderful perspective there on learning from the experience of those around us to improve the future. So Bill, I thought that was probably a nice little touch there that you had. So good job. All right, our last speaker, Glenn Miller, is going to kind of tie it all together for us. Glenn is a senior associate with the Canadian Urban Institute in Toronto. He's the author of No Place to Grow Old: How Canadian Suburbs Can Become Age-Friendly, published recently by Canada's Institute for Research in Public Policy. He's a graduate of Montreal's McGill University with a master's in urban planning, and from Concordia University, a BA, honorary BA in urban studies. He is also a fellow of the Canadian Institute of Planners. And Glenn will bring to us some detailed data and thoughts about when age will expect more from the community itself. And over to you, Glenn.
Well, thanks, Martin, and thanks, Jake. And I think Shannon and Bill have given you a great start to this conversation. Here at the Institute, I lead our work related to aging and all of the issues related to that. Been doing that for about the past 10 years. And the Canadian Urban Institute is a nonprofit organization that's been around for 26 years. So we've improved our survival skills. Let's go to the next slide, please. Oh, I think we missed one, a couple. Could you go back? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So we're going to start off. I'm going to cover some of the same ground that Shannon and Bill have, but from a slightly different perspective. I'm speaking to you, as Martin said, from Canada. So I thought it'd be fun just to give you a sense of some of the differences and the commonalities between our two countries. What you see before you is referred to as a population pyramid, because the pattern you see is more or less like a pyramid, a triangle. And the cohorts are really how we age, how we group the different ages into little groups. So you'll probably be interested in the 10 to 14 group, and you can see there's quite a lot of you back in 1962. Interesting thing here is that the Canada and the United States are roughly we're about 10. The United States is about 10 times larger than Canada in terms of population. So when back in 1962, only 7% of our population was over the age of 65, and this is when we started to build what I'm calling car-dependent suburbs to build what's known as the baby boom generation. So let's go to the next slide, please. So here you see the same type of pattern from today. The same proportion between Canada and the United States exists, but it's kind of more like a rocket ship than a pyramid now. And there's relatively fewer people who are in the children's bracket, and people like your grandparents are probably up in the 60 to 70 bracket, and there's a lot more of them proportionally than there used to be. So let's go to the next slide. So here's the same information presented in a slightly different form. So here in Canada today, about 16% of Canadians are now over 65. And it's roughly the same in the United States, I think. And so if you remember, back in 62, 50 odd years ago, it was only 7%. So that's a huge rate of increase. So we already have more older people than school-age children. And here in Canada, there's many cities and small towns, particularly small towns, where more than 25% of the population is over the age of 65. So the need for trying to solve the age issue is quite important. Let's go to the next slide, please. So there was a slide that we missed at the beginning, which said, well, what are the problem we're trying to solve? So we've got a demographic problem, and that's dealing with the population, and also dealing with the built environment, the cities and towns and villages around us. So how do we develop this? And I think you heard some of this from Bill. So for the last 60 years or so, there's been a lot of focus from the transportation planners on how to get people to work. And many of the jobs that your parents have been engaged in are office jobs in car-dependent workplaces where they've had to drive every day. And the shopping also, you have to drive to shopping centers. So that's created what I'm calling an age-unfriendly development. So when you're thinking about your competition and what you're going to be doing, you can look around you and see, well, here's a problem. I'd like to see if I can fix that. So let's go to the next slide. And so we have, as Martin said, I did this publication about suburbs are no place to grow old. And here's a gentleman who's obviously had to give up driving. He's waiting for the bus, and he might have quite a long wait because transit service in the suburbs is not always that great. So let's go to the next slide. Thank you. And so quality of life for everybody, we heard this from Shannon and Bill. I mean, the quality of life has to work for you at all stages in your life course. And it's really dependent on your health. We're a lot healthier than we used to be. The finances, the affordability of housing, and things like that. But also where you live determines what kind of experience you're going to have. About 2/3 of Canadians live in suburbs, and a good proportion of older people live in single detached housing, which are usually in those car-dependent suburbs. And so this means, as you heard from Bill, that you've got to drive to the shops, drive to work, drive to the medical facilities, and all the things you need to do in your everyday life. And so these age-unfriendly neighborhoods with single detached housing, as we just had our recent census results released in Canada, and our average household size has been decreasing with great rapidity. So combined with the aging of the population, there's a real chance that a lot of neighborhoods are just not going to have the kind of population that you need to support all retail and municipal services. And so the densification, things that you can do to make things more effective for people, but also from the municipalities that have to run things. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the issue of driving, we've heard a lot about this today. We're living longer, we're healthier, and most of us, even you guys, will outlive your ability to drive. That's either for financial reasons or because the physician says, I'm sorry, you're just no longer competent to drive. And we have reports that say that a lot of people are still driving even though they've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, which is a form of dementia, which is not a good thing. And our Ministry of Transportation here in Ontario has forecast that we are looking at the car-dependent areas around Toronto. 42% of the people living there are going to have no driving license within about less than 20 years. So that's a bit of a problem. How are we going to fix that? So let's go to the next slide. And this reinforces the challenge for people who run cities, because you can't just switch to transit. We have lots of research that tells us that people who've been driving all of their lives are it's very difficult to have them switch to transit. And of course, if you're taking transit in the suburbs, that's another problem because there isn't so much of it. If you look at the blue line, the rate of propensity to drive actually starts to tail off after people reach the 60s and 70s, and the red line mirrors that because people are having to be passengers, and the poor old green line down at the bottom is the people taking transit. So you can see that people your age are more likely to take transit, and then you get out into the working world and leave transit behind. So we're all trying to fix that, but in the moment, that's a bit of a problem. Let's go to the next slide. So we all need reasons to be mobile. I think Bill and Shannon did a great job of outlining some of the details of that, whether it's shopping, getting to the doctor, doing your banking, going to the library, all those kinds of things. And so let's go to the next slide, and we'll just focus for a few minutes on some of the solutions. So on the one hand, you can take the approach that let's fix the built environment. And what I mean by push and pull, that first bullet there, will you be pushed out of your house, out of your neighborhood, or will you be pulled out to somewhere that you find attractive? If we've managed to build age-friendly communities that are going to be more attractive and pull you out of your current place, but you want to be able to stay in your neighborhood. So this is a place in just outside of Toronto, and it's the redevelopment of a former industrial site, and it's now a very successful aging community where people of all ages are moving in from the surrounding area. And our statistics show that it's working out quite well. And the same thing is true with a number of rebuilt shopping centers and things like that. So you can start to retrofit your communities. So let's go to next couple of slides. Next one. Yeah, that's it. So can technology help? Well, online delivery has just taken over the world, as we know. We've got, here in Canada, we have grocerygateway.com, and you've got Fresh Direct, I know, and people are doing their medical visits online, and even the libraries are getting into the act and delivering a service to people's door. Well, that's great. It's very convenient, but it doesn't get people out into the neighborhood and get them engaged. And we know that people, if they're more active, they're going to be more healthy. And we also have to be concerned about the impact on local retail if everybody's sort of sticking in their house. So technology has a role to play, but it's not the only solution. Let's go to the next slide, please. Well, smartphones have again really come along a long way. Uber and Lyft and other ride-sharing services have made it a lot easier for people who are tech-savvy to drive. And part of the reason for that is that it's cashless. You deal with a credit card, so you don't have to say, oh, how much is this going to cost me? So it makes it a lot easier to deal with. I also wanted to spend a couple of minutes just talking about a pilot that's being carried out by Uber here in Toronto, where they're working with a senior citizens home where the staff have an iPad and they fix up the rides for people and write down the information that that their residents need, and they take that with them, and they don't have to worry about having a smartphone. And of course, there's the ride sharing in vans, which can be sort of an effective way to meet other people and not be just keeping to yourself. So let's go to my final slide. We've heard a lot about autonomous or self-driving cars, and it's gone from science fiction to reality, or it seems to be going very fast. But we have to ask some basic questions. Who's going to own these, and who's going to maintain them? We have a whole economy that's built around car ownership, and the transition to fleet ownership is going to be difficult. And when you're designing your age-friendly city, if you start to think of the potential for self-driving cars, you've got to figure out where they're going to sit. And there's a couple of images there that give you some suggestions. And the other issue is that will they only work for people who are mobile and tech savvy? Because one of the advantages of having a taxi driver or an Uber driver help you into the car is that you've got another human being to help you make that transition. And self-driving cars, I don't think, are going to be able to do that. So just my final slide. This is a quote from a gerontologist in the UK from years ago, Bernard Isaacs: "Design for the young, you exclude the old, and you design for the old, and you include everyone." So that's it for my presentation. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you very much, Glenn and Shannon and Bill. I believe the three of you have gotten me thinking a lot more about my future and what it's going to look like. And from the looks of it, it looks like a lot of everyone attending is starting to think about the future of their city. So that's great. That said, I'd like to hand it back over to the Future City staff there, and maybe there's some other questions that might need to be directed to the panelists.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Glenn, Shannon, and Bill. Really interesting, really great to hear about. And thank you, Martin, very much for doing a fantastic job guiding us through. If anybody we're getting some questions in now, which is great. If anyone else has any questions specifically about age-friendly cities, age-friendly design, about anything that came up in the webinar today, be sure to type it in now, and we'll direct that to the panelist. If you have general questions about Future City, about the program or the competition, those can be directed to your regional coordinator or info@futurecity.org. But any questions about the presentation today, you can go ahead and type it in now. We have one question from Daniel. He has a question for Shannon. He asks, do all seniors have the same kinds of needs for when they are getting older?
So, excuse me, thank you, Daniel. That's a great question. So, no, all seniors don't have the same types of needs. You want to think about, when we think of older adults, you want to think about the younger older adults on up through what we call frail older adults, which are 85 plus. So maybe starting at 50, 55 to going all the way to 85 and beyond. You also want to think about, so there's definitely a variety there. You also want to think about as we get older, the chances are that we may develop a disability over time. That rate gets higher as we age. So you want to think about physical ability may vary. You want to also think about what activities people of different ages are involved in. You may have older adults who are still working and how they're able to get around. So, you know, they're not all dealing with the same issues. You also want to think about where they may be living. Are they living in a rural community? Are they living in an urban community? If they're living in a more urban community, chances are they have better access to certain services or certain amenities versus, you know, another type of geography. So there's all those different nuances that you want to think about when you're thinking about people who are older adults or people who are aging, which we all are. So I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Shannon. Ricardo asks, Bill, how should we implement a sense of community in a large city?
You go to neighborhoods, and this is one of the things a lot of communities and a lot of cities are grappling with, is they plan out the city, but people live in neighborhoods. So as you look at this, think about what's involved with your neighborhood. Can people access what they want nearby within, you know, a 5 to 10 minute walk? And there's also something you can Google, which is the 20-minute community, to talk about that. So thinking about breaking it up into a variety of different areas. There may be places that are more focused on, you know, the work and careers, and there may be areas that you want to integrate a little bit more, but think about where people live and what they can get to right away, and that's nearby.
Great, thank you. We have another question for Shannon from Dylan. What features did you put in the age-friendly house? You mentioned a couple things like the how it was easily accessible, but can you talk a little bit about some of the other features that were important?
Sure. For this home, again, it was an existing home that was in Memphis, Tennessee. So we added, so the design had a zero-step entry. It had wide doors. It also had open spaces, so you don't have your typical narrow hallways. You had a curbless shower with a bench. You have in the bathroom, you have different counter heights. Also, one really interesting feature was flexible space within the home. So you have a space for an office right now, but as you age, you can turn that office into another bedroom for a caregiver. It also had something very interesting out front, which are these large planters. This is not necessarily accessible design, but it's a way to bring people into the community. It has large planters outside, so as the homeowner goes outside and does gardening, they can interact with people within their community, their neighbors. But really what makes an accessible home is the availability for people to maneuver through, to do the things that they need to do independently. So can they cook independently? Can they take a shower independently? Can they get outside independently. We want to make sure that that they have a home that supports whatever they need to do within the home, and that makes it easier for them to leave their home. And there is more information about visitable and universal design homes in your resources that we provided.
Great. Thank you, Shannon. We have a question from Elizabeth for Glenn. She asked about sometimes rideshare kind of programs can be dangerous, and you touched on a little bit how having someone there to help someone get in or out of transportation is important. Can you go talk a little bit about how we can make sure that seniors are safe when they're using these new or different kinds of transportation options?
Well, thanks. That's a great question. Public safety is hugely important. I think the companies like Uber and Lyft put a great deal of effort into making sure that the safety is paramount. And as you probably know, there are ways that you can provide feedback in following a ride. But one of the other things that's interesting is the development of partnerships. And I know that Uber has developed lots of partnerships with municipal transit agencies where they help provide that sort of middle ground between the private car and the public transit, so the best of both worlds. And so when the public agencies are involved, that's going to sort of underscore the value of safety. And here in Toronto, I'm working with the City of Toronto on their age-friendly strategy, and one of the features that we've been able to emphasize is that we've got the City of Toronto to embrace Vision Zero, which is a program from Sweden that introduces things like pedestrian safety zones for seniors and things like that.
Great. Thank you, Glenn. I think we have time for one more question. This comes from Jordan. It's to Bill. He asks, would a city with a sector just for the elderly, a sector just for the middle-aged, and a sector just for families still be considered age-friendly?
That's an interesting question, because I think if you look historically back, we did that in the 70s and early 80s, well before you all were born, where we started creating these senior communities and senior high-rises. And what we're finding through talking to people is, as people age, they want to be in their community, they want to be near their grandkids, they want to be near their family, and have those opportunities to connect across generations. I was thinking about this too, as you're thinking about your work, is even looking at multi-generational housing. So you can explore it, but it'd be interesting to ask people what their reaction would be as they did that, and then what would happen if you started in. Would you have to move to another area if you got older, or would everybody in your area sort of age together? So there's a lot of interesting conversations. And the other thing you could look at in New York City, which is now sort of a national occurrence, there was a thing called NORCs, which are naturally occurring retirement communities. What they did was, in the 60s, they built these huge high-rises, and people moved in with their kids, and then everyone's kids graduated, they got older, they retired, and this high-rise now, 40, 50 years later, is a naturally occurring retirement community. So they actually rethought, instead of having people go out for services in this big high-rise, they brought social services and different services right to that community. So like I said, there's some interesting models. I think it'd be interesting for you to talk to people and then research some of the things that are going on.
So I'd like to add to that, because I think Bill raises some great points, but I also would like the participants to really think about those aspects of community that we share, or those desires that we share across generations. You definitely have to take into consideration some special needs or certain needs that older adults may have, but largely we we want some of the same things within the community. We want things nearby, conveniences nearby. We want affordable housing and transportation. And so if you look at those commonalities, I think, and design your community around commonalities, I think that, that will help spur some really innovative ideas in bringing these generations together.
Great. Well, thank you, Shannon and Bill and Glenn. Very interesting questions, very interesting answers. So once again, thank you, Shannon and Bill and Glenn and Martin. We're out of time, but this was very interesting. I hope you all enjoyed it as well. Thank you for being a part of this year's Future City topic webinar. As some of our panelists mentioned, they have lists of resources in addition to our Future City resources that will be up on our website tomorrow, along with the recording of this webinar. And don't forget to take the survey at the end of the webinar. Once you close out, it'll pop up. And give us your feedback about what you thought and what you'd like to see next time. So big thank you to all our guests and our great host. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day. Bye-bye.